How to audit your time as someone with ADHD. You think you know where your time goes. You have a general sense of it, a feeling, a narrative you built up in your head about how your days run. You work hard, you're busy, you're always doing something. The problem is that feeling is almost certainly wrong, and the gap between what you believe about your time and what is actually happening inside it is costing you more than you can currently measure. This is not a discipline problem. It is not a focus problem, not a motivational problem, and it is definitely not a character flaw. It is a perception problem, and it is baked directly into how your brain processes time. Most ADHD founders have built entire businesses on top of a fundamentally distorted map and then wondered why they keep ending up lost. A time audit is the tool that replaces the feeling with data, but not the kind of time audit you have probably tried before, abandoned on day 2 and quietly blamed yourself for not finishing. That version was not built for your brain. This one is. Dr. Russell Barkley, one of the most cited researchers in ADHD science, has spent decades documenting what he calls the ADHD time horizon problem. His research consistently shows that individuals with ADHD experience time not as a continuous measurable flow, but as two states, now and not now. Past and future collapse into a kind of blur. Only the present moment has real weight. This is not metaphorical. It is a measurable difference in how the prefrontal cortex manages temporal information, and it has direct, concrete consequences for how you understand where your time actually goes. What this means in practice is that you cannot accurately self-report your time. When you sit down and try to remember what you did last Tuesday, your brain does not retrieve a reliable log. It retrieves a feeling, an impression, a story you've told yourself about the kind of person you are and the kind of work you do. Research published in the Journal of Attention Disorder has found that adults with ADHD significantly underestimate time spent on low engagement tasks and overestimate time spent on high engagement ones. You remember the deep work session that felt meaningful. You do not remember the 90 minutes you spent bouncing between tabs trying to get started. This is why the standard productivity advice of just track your time for a week fails completely for ADHD brains. The advice assumes you will remember to track and that you can accurately estimate blocks you forgot to log, and that your perception of how the day went is a reasonable approximation of reality. None of those assumptions hold. A tool built on faulty assumptions produces faulty data, and faulty data produces faulty decisions. You cannot build a system on top of a lie about your own behavior. The audit you are going to run is not about catching yourself being lazy. It is forensic work. You are gathering evidence about a system that has been running in the background without your full awareness, because your brain was never designed to keep an accurate running tally. Understanding this reframe is not optional. If you start this audit thinking this is a test of your willpower, you will interpret every uncomfortable finding as evidence of personal failure. It is not. It is data, and data is the only thing that actually helps. Why standard time audits fail ADHD brains. The traditional time audit looks like this. At the end of each day, or sometimes at the end of the week, you sit down and try to reconstruct where your hours went. You might use a spreadsheet. You might use a journaling prompt. Some systems have you estimate percentages. The underlying assumption of all these methods is that you have been passively noticing and storing accurate time data throughout the day, and that the retrieval process is reasonably reliable. For most ADHD brains, both of those assumptions are false. A 2019 study in neuropsychology reviewed time estimation accuracy across ADHD and non-ADHD adults and found consistent, significant deficits in prospective time estimations and durations reproduction in the ADHD group. In plain language, people with ADHD are not just slightly off in their time estimates. They are systematically off in predictable directions, and retrospective recall makes it worse because it layers a second round of cognitive distortion on top of already unreliable perception. You are not bad at tracking your time because you lack discipline. You are bad at it because your brain was not built for the task. The other reason standard audits fail is the interruption problem. Most time tracker systems require you to manually log a new task every time you switch. For a neurotypical person who switches tasks a handful of times a day in a clean, predictable transitions, this is manageable. For an ADHD founder who might switch focus 15 times in a single hour, fragmenting between deep work and slack, and a random idea, and a 3-minute research spiral and back, manual logging becomes its own overwhelming task. The act of tracking starts to take more cognitive load than the work itself, and the brain, which is always seeking the path of least resistance, simply stops doing it. The system you are going to use addresses both of these failure points directly. It reduces the tracking burden to the lowest possible threshold, removes retrospective recall from the equation almost entirely, and gives you a structure that works with ADHD attention patterns rather than against them. You will not be logging every task switch in real time. You will not be reconstructing your week from memory on a Friday afternoon. You will be doing something much more simpler, and the data you get back will be more honest than anything you have produced before. The 3-day audit, what you're actually measuring. The audit runs for 3 days, not a week, not a month, 3 days, because that is the minimum viable data set for finding patterns. And because asking an ADHD brain to maintain a new tracking habit for 7 consecutive days introduces too many points of failure before the data is useful. If you want to extend it to 7 days after the first 3, do that. but do not make 7 days a requirement before you have permission to look at what you found. 3 days is enough to see the truth. What you are tracking is not every minute. You are tracking 30-minute blocks. At the end of each 30-minute period, you write down one word from 4 categories: deep, admin, reactive, or drift. Deep means you were in focused, high-leverage work that moves your business forward. Admin means you were doing necessary operational tasks like email, scheduling, invoicing. Reactive means you were responding to things that came at you rather than things that you chose. Drift means you were in distraction, low engagement browsing, scattered task switching, or generally not working. That is the whole system. The reason this works where other systems fail is that it requires almost no memory. You are not reconstructing the last hours at 5 p.m. You are answering a single question about what just happened in the last 30 minutes. The cognitive load is low enough that you can actually do it consistently, and consistency is the only thing that makes the data real. A perfect log of 2 days beats a half-remembered log of 7 days every time. You will use the companion template linked in the description for this. It is a simple Google Sheet with 3 daily tracking sheets, the 4 categories definition written out, and a summary page that totals your blocks out at the end. You open the sheet, you make a copy, and you fill in one word every 30 minutes. That is the whole setup. The goal is to remove every possible excuse not to start, because the audit cannot help you if you never run it. One important note before you begin: do not try to perform during the audit. The temptation, especially for high-achieving ADHD founders, is to run a sanitized version of your week because you know you are being watched, even if you are the only one watching. Fight this. The audit is useful only if it reflects reality. A week of forced performance followed by a system built on the performance data will collapse at the moment the performance does. You need honest data, even if the honest data is uncomfortable. Reading what the data actually shows you. After 3 days, you will total your blocks in each category. You'll probably feel something when you see the numbers. That feeling is the audit working. Most ADHD founders fall into one of 3 patterns, and the pattern you find determines the system you need. This is not a one-size-fits-all prescription. The data is pointing you towards a specific problem, and the solution follows from the problem. The first pattern is the reactive trap. This shows up when your admin and reactive blocks together outnumber your deep blocks by a significant margin, often 2 to 1 or worse. If this is you, your days are structured around what other people need from you rather than what your business needs from you. You're probably a good communicator, highly responsive, someone your team or clients would describe as available. The cost of that availability is that your high-leverage work keeps getting pushed to the end of the day or the end of the week, when your energy is lowest and your focus is thinnest. The reactive work feels productive because it is active and social and generates immediate feedback. Which ADHD brains are neurologically drawn towards, but it is eating the time that should belong to the work only you can do. This appears when your drift blocks are higher than you expected, often clustered in predictable windows of the day, usually mid-morning after the initial energy spike fades, or mid-afternoon after lunch. This pattern does not mean you are lazy. It usually means that your work structure has stretches of low stimulation tasks with no clear endpoint, and your brain, which requires higher than average stimulation to sustain engagement, exits the task without you consciously deciding to. A 2020 paper in the Journal of Neurotransmission found that dopaminergic dysregulation in ADHD creates a structural engagement problem with tasks that lack clear, intrinsic reward, novelty, or urgency. The third pattern is attention fragmentation. This shows up when your deep work block exists but are scattered, rarely appearing in consecutive slots, frequently interrupted by single admin or reactive blocks in between. You are doing the important work, but never for long enough in a single stretch for it to compound. Research on cognitive load and task switching shows that recovering full focus after an interruption takes an average of 23 minutes for most people. For ADHD brain, that recovery cost may be higher and less predictable. What looks like 4 hours of deep work in your week might actually be 8 interrupted sessions that each took 20 minutes to get into, and you were cut off before they produced anything substantial. Your total hours are not the problem, your architecture is. Matching your pattern to a structure. This is where the audit becomes a design tool. Based on the pattern your data shows, you are going to implement one of these 3 structures. Not all 3, not a hybrid of all 3 to cover your bases. 1. The one your data indicates. Adding more structure than the problem requires is its own form of avoidance, and ADHD brains are particularly good at building elaborate systems as a substitute for doing the actual work. If your data shows a reactive trap, the structure you need is time blocking. This means designing a specific window in your calendar for deep work that are treated as non-negotiable commitments and batching all reactive and admin work into defined windows rather than letting it interrupt your day continuously. Cal Newport's research on deep work provides a framework here, but the ADHD-specific adaptation is critical. Your deep work blocks need to be tied to your highest energy windows, not just wherever a blank slot appears in your calendar. For most ADHD founders, that window is the first 2 or 3 hours after a full wakefulness, before decision fatigue and stimulation accumulation start degrading focus. Block that window first, build everything else around it. If your data shows the engagement gap, the structure you need is energy-based scheduling. This means mapping your tasks not just by urgency or importance, but by the type of stimulation they require, and sequencing them to match your energy curve across the day. High novelty, high stakes, high interest tasks go into your peak windows. Administrative tasks that are low stimulation but low consequence go into your lowest energy windows. The goal is to stop assigning tasks based on when they theoretically fit in the calendar and start assigning them based on when your brain is actually equipped to do them. This is not about lowering standards. It is about deploying your attention where it will actually land. If your data shows attention fragmentation, the structure you need is a protected block system. This means identifying your two most important deep work tasks each day and giving each one a protected, uninterrupted block of at least 90 minutes with all notifications off, all tabs closed to the task at hand, and a clearly defined deliverable for what done looks like before you start. The protected block is not about working longer. It is about removing the recovery tax that interruptions impose. 90 uninterrupted minutes will consistently produce more than 3 hours of fragmented time, and once you have the data to see that clearly, the trade-off becomes obvious. The forgotten variable, transition time. There is one thing that the basic audit will surface that most founders are not prepared to see, and it is worth naming directly before you run the numbers. Transition time is the hidden drain. It does not show up in the audit as its own category because it lives inside the other blocks. But once you start tracking with this level of granularity, you will notice it. A block logged as deep was probably deep for about half of its duration. The first 15 minutes of most ADHD focus sessions are spent arriving, and arriving is invisible to retrospective recall. Barclay's research on ADHD and working memory highlights that task initiations is a genuine executive function deficit, not a habit problem or a mindset problem. The brain is not being stubborn when it takes 20 minutes to actually get into a task. It is doing something neurologically expensive, loading context, suppressing competing thoughts, building the activation energy required to sustain focus. This process takes longer for ADHD brains, and it is real work even when it does not feel productive. The practical implication is that when you design your structure based on your audit data, you need to build transition time explicitly rather than treating it as a wasted space. If you are time blocking, add a 10-minute buffer between every major block transition, not to fill with activity, but to close one context and open the next. If you are using a protected block system, your 90-minute block should include the arrival time, not pretend it does not exist. When you stop treating transition time as a failure to be minimized and start treating it as a real cost to be accounted for, your schedule becomes honest, and honest schedules are the only ones that actually work. What to do with the data after day 3? You now have real data about how your time actually moves. You've identified your primary pattern. You've matched it to a structure. The last step, the one that most people skip, is building a re-audit cadence. Not because you need to track your time forever, but because the structure you implement will drift. Life will interrupt it. A busy week will push back the deep work blocks. Reactive work will expand to fill available time, as it always does, and without a data check, you will not notice the drift until it has already cost you weeks. Run your chosen structure for 2 weeks, then run the 3-day audit again. Compare the before and after, not to congratulate yourself if the numbers improved, and not to shame yourself if they did not. To see what changed, what held, and what needs adjustment. A system that you monitor and refine is not a sign that the system failed. It is a sign that you are doing strategy correctly. The goal is not to build a perfect structure once and follow it forever. The goal is to get progressively more honest about how you work and progressively more intentional about how you design around that reality. Your audit data belongs in your decision making about your business, not just your personal productivity. If the data shows that you are spending 60% of your week in reactive and admin work, that is a hiring signal. It tells you what the first role you delegate needs to look like before you have spent another quarter drowning in the wrong task. If the data shows that you drift clusters around specific type of work, that might be a signal about what you should stop doing altogether, or systematize, or assign. The audit is not just about making you more productive. It is about making better decisions with real information about where your capacity is actually going. The belief you need to leave with. Most of the productive frameworks that have been built, packaged, and sold to you were not built for your brain in mind. They assume a relationship with time that your brain does not have, and they treat the consequences of that difference as a personal failure rather than design problems. Every time you started a time audit and quit, it was not because you lacked discipline. It was because you were using the wrong tool for the hardware you were running on. The audit you just learned is not a silver bullet. No system is. But it is one of the few tools in the productivity space that starts from the right premise, which is that you cannot trust your perception of your own time, and that the only path forward is to replace that perception with something more reliable than feeling. Data does not lie in the ways that memory does. Data does not have bad days or good days. Data does not feel embarrassed or make excuses. It just shows you what happened, and once you see what actually happened clearly, you can finally start making decisions about what happens next. Your ADHD brain is not the problem. An unexamined schedule built on a faulty map is the problem. The audit gives you the real map. What you build on top of it is up to you. If you're a founder with ADHD and want to be a part of a community with other individuals who understand how you feel on a day to day basis, join the school community below. See you inside.